So let me introduce you to our colleagues, and I think that Meg Lossier has put a message in the chat for a little work on your part, so we can all say hi to one another. I am Dawn Wiggins here. I'm joining you from Monroeville, Alabama, and I would like to introduce my colleagues to you. Leanne Goldman works with the General Commission, and she is our Director of Office Administration. She's joining us from Chicago, Illinois. Meg Lossier is our Director of Resource Development and Training, and she's joining us from somewhere around Indianapolis. Is that right, Meg? Okay.
Yeah, just north of Indianapolis. Yep.
Just north of Indianapolis. Becky Posey Williams is our Senior Director of Sexual Ethics and Advocacy. She's joining us from Jackson, Mississippi. And Eileen Delgado is our Director of Communications. She's joining us from Houston, Texas. So that's why we're having a shout out to all of you. Please put in the chat where you're joining us from, your annual conference and your jurisdiction, or identify your jurisdiction, because one of our projects going forward is to make sure that we are organizing the annual conference COSROWs as best we can, putting y'all in touch with one another so that folks can share learnings, can share trainings, can share best practices. Someone we also want to introduce, and I don't know if she's on the call on the Zoom yet, is that we have a brand new staff member who will be joining us July 1st. And you should, if you receive our newsletter, you will have seen that announcement that went out earlier this week, that Denise Smart Sears will be joining us as our Director of Leadership Development and Accountability. And that will be as of July 1st. Those of you that are chairs or key members of your annual conference, COSROW, Denise is going to be your contact, your main contact, although all of us are always available if you need us. Just reach out. We're only a phone call, a text, a email message away. So with that, I also want to have a really special thank you for two additional presenters with us today. Kelly Hitchman Craig comes to us from the Alabama West Florida Conference, and Julia Pritchett Gonzalez comes to us from the Indiana annual conference, and they have been stellar in helping develop and guide their respective annual conference monitoring program. So later on in our training, we're going to have a panel featuring the two of them, where you'll have an opportunity to ask some questions, and they'll have an opportunity to share some of the lessons they learned, the practical lessons in bringing an annual conference monitoring up to speed. So with that, let's get started.
Hey everyone, my name is Eileen Delgado. Like Dawn said, I just want to hop on here really quick and give some technical tips. We're excited to have you all here and see all your faces and see your names in your annual conferences. I'm sure that most of us are familiar with Zoom. We've gotten really familiar with Zoom over the last few years, but I just want to go over some things before we get started. I do want to let you all know that this meeting is being recorded. We will be publishing this on our YouTube, and we'll be sharing this so you can reference it in the future. We encourage you to have this on speaker view so that you can see the screen that is being shared and see the person that is speaking at a time, instead of, having a million little faces all over the screen. We do encourage you to use reactions, but we want you to use the chat. Like, for example, if Meg or Dawn or Becky's saying something and you have a question, we are going to be having intentional pauses. So if you have a question or a comment, please put it in the chat. I will be monitoring the chats, but we will have specific times where we will take a break and, make sure that if there are questions that they are answered, if there are comments, we want to acknowledge them. So please put your questions in the chat. We will get to them. And then if you have any other questions, like technical questions, you can also reach out to me through the chat and I can help you out. I guess also try to stay muted. We will also be on the lookout. You know, sometimes it's happened to all of us. Sometimes we just leave our microphone on and then, you know, we hear stuff that can be distracting. So just try to stay muted, but we'll also try to keep an eye on that. I think that is it for me.
Almost, but Eileen, your first job is to monitor the chat. So share with us where folks are from. What are you seeing in the chat?
Oh my gosh, everyone's been so active. Okay, let's see, let's take it. I've seen, well, Mountain Sky, I'm from Mountain Sky, so I think I was the first one. We've got Emily Sanford from Mississippi, Andrea Byard-Thomas, Florida, Terry Krause, Indiana, Pat, New York, Megan, Western Pennsylvania, woo, woo. Kelly Hitchman Craig from Alabama, West Florida, Kristen Hansen, Desert Southwest, okay. Toby, North Carolina, Emily, Mountain Sky, Lauren, hey Lauren, East Ohio, Sally from Delaware. We've got Jacksonville, Florida, Desert Southwest, New York LIE conference. Okay, Mary from New York, Julie, Indiana, Deborah from North Central Jurisdiction, Minnesota, Columbia, South Carolina, Central Texas, North Alabama, Florida, Florida, North Texas, North Georgia. Yeah, we've got good representation from all over, so that's super exciting.
Excellent. And that is a goal of ours, to have training across the jurisdictions in the US and to have that training to include across our central conferences. And we may have some of our central conference sisters joining us too. We've had a couple register, realizing time zones are upside down for them, and this is being recorded for their benefit also. So to start this off, we have a question for you too. And this is going to be a little poll that we're going to take to say who is here. Eileen has noted some of what the information that you put in our chat is, but we are all about data and we're all about challenging the United Methodist Church. So we'd like to know who is here. Are you clergy or laity? How long have you been with your AC COSROW committee? And I believe there is one more question. No, that's it.
Do you guys see the poll?
Yeah, is the poll
Okay.
showing up? Okay, good.
Okay, so you should have seen a small window pop up on your screen. So go ahead and fill that out now.
Eileen, it looks like most people have filled it out.
Oh.
You're muted.
So we have 73% clergy, 27% laity, and look at the numbers. This is very interesting. 19% have been active in AC COSROW within 1 to 2 years. 31% for 2 to 5 years, and 23% less than 1 year. Almost a fourth are brand new folk, and welcome. This is really exciting. So thank you so much for adding to that. When any of our work at the General Commission is first and foremost based on Scripture. Galatians 3:28, there is no longer Jew or Greek, there is no longer slave or free, there is no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. That is a huge part of our work, is to make sure that we are living a life to show that we are created, we as women, all persons, are created in the image of Christ. So in the image of God. So thank you for being champions of that messaging across the United Methodist Church. We also wanted to share with you a little bit of our timeline, never want to miss an opportunity, that our work was again, data is so important for challenging the church. In 1944 was the first data that was collected by the predecessor of United Women in Faith, the women's division. Created, Grace Bragg performed a study to show there was widespread discrimination against women in the Methodist Church. It wasn't the United Methodist Church at that time. 1956, those of you who are clergy will celebrate that was when full clergy membership rights were granted for women in the denomination. That happened at a general conference. In 1972 was when General Conference established the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. And last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary, our 50th birthday. Sometimes we used it one or the other ways. And there has been a tremendous amount of accomplishment by men and women in the church for the mission and ministry of the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women over these 50 years. But if data shows us anything, it shows us there is still more to do, a lot more to do. Most recently, in fact, one number that's not on here that I'll step back a minute, in 2016, we had a significant election for women bishops in the United States. We had 4 African-American women elected for the first time ever, and that was a significant moment of intersectionality of our work. And in 2022, for the first time, we had 8 female bishops elected, including in the Philippines, for the first time ever, the election of a female bishop, Bishop Ruby Nell Estrella, which was absolutely an incredible moment of celebration. I did want you to know that we also had a little video celebrating this, and I will either share the link or we'll share the video. I'm not sure which we're going to do now, but we did want that moment of celebration for you to be able to join with us.
We're going to share the video. It's only a minute long.
Excellent. Thank you. And you can see when we watch that video, we just smile from ear to ear. We were actually present, monitoring the jurisdictions and the jurisdictional elections. And it was just absolutely an incredible moment. We had a monitor in the Philippines when Bishop Ruby Nels was elected. And you just can't imagine the joy. And I'm going to speak with you a little bit later in this training about what your work can be, but shouldn't be if there are elections being held within your annual conference. So let's go. Sure, absolutely. There is a request that we pause just a moment for prayer. Dear God of hope, your love makes possible the impossible. When we are facing seemingly impossible situations, remind us of your love and the possibilities it proclaims. Amen. We could turn to our mandate at the General Commission, our primary purpose, and that leads to this work, is to challenge the United Methodist Church to a continuing commitment to the full and equal responsibility and participation of women in the total life and mission of the church, sharing fully in the power and in the policy making at all levels of the church's life. And I do want to focus on that, on the pieces that are bolded. Challenge. Monitoring is not a bad word, and it's real important. Monitoring is collecting data, it's giving reports. I'm going to make a stretch that I don't think it's a far stretch to say monitoring is a wellness concept, and it's a wellness tool. All of us monitor what we eat. We monitor how we eat for our wellness and our health. We monitor our steps. I guarantee you almost everybody on this has either a Fitbit or an Apple Watch, or you use your iPhone to count your steps. That data collection is important for you monitoring your health. Monitoring of the church, of our elections, of our meetings, to assure that there is full and equal responsibility and participation of women in the total life of the church. Monitoring to assure that we are sharing fully in the power and policy making at all levels of the church's life. That's the wellness of the United Methodist Church. So if you leave here with nothing else, I want you to be able to say monitoring is not a bad word. Monitoring is a part of the church's wellness, and wellness is what we should all be about. I also want to point you to the social principles, in that in social principle number 161F, there is this language: we affirm the scripture, the common humanity of male and female, both having equal worth in the eyes of God. We reject the erroneous notion that one gender is superior to another, and that one gender must strive against another, and that members of one gender may receive love, power, and esteem only at the expense of the other. And you'll see how we've expanded our monitoring forms to include non-binary language too, as we get to that. Right now, the Book of Discipline is a very binary book, but you will see how we've expanded our forms as we get to that. I did share with you our recent jurisdictional work. We most recently in November monitored the jurisdictional elections. We have a report, because monitoring doesn't mean anything until you put a report out there and you actually challenge the church. And I will note, and you'll see this is a theme also, we don't just want to tell folks what could have been better. We want to suggest how it could be better, so that we're always seen as having positive steps forward. And here is a link to both our report and also to the charts. The way that we challenged the church was to have charts of the opportunities for the election of women bishops, and kept that in front of them, not endorsing any particular candidate, but giving the delegates the opportunity to be challenged to see how they could make sure their Episcopal leadership was fully balanced. So with that, I want to thank you and hand over to my colleague, Meg Lassier, who will share with you some ideas about annual conferences. And let me just pause for a moment, Eileen, to see if there were any questions or any topics in the chat that I might have missed that we might need to lift up at this point before we start a new section.
We're good.
Okay, then Meg, would you please take it away?
Sure, thank you, Dawn. What we want to do now is shift the conversation a little bit to what we are looking for within monitoring. Dawn has given you an introduction to what monitoring is and why we do this for the church. And we're going to talk over the next few slides about the kinds of things that you will be paying attention to when you are monitoring a session, and the kind of data we are trying to collect, and the kind of feedback that you will have the opportunity, hopefully, to give back to your annual conference. General conference, this is an assignment to GCOSROW by the General Conference. And when you are monitoring on behalf of your annual conference or within your annual conference, you are partnering with us and partnering with the General Conference to be intentional about building the beloved community, about making sure that everybody is included in the conversation, and about finding places where the gathered body is already demonstrating that people are being accepted and respected and listened to, and then finding places where they can improve to do that. As you know, a lot of times, implicit bias is something that it's a framework that we have that helps us to navigate the world. And GCOR has done important work for us within the church. You can see these statistics. The brain can take in a lot of information at one time, but we do not have the ability to continually sift that information and prioritize it. So we develop structures that help us approach the world, and these implicit biases can be good. They can help us. They can help us when we're deciding if this is a dangerous situation or a helpful situation. However, sometimes that implicit bias will get in the way. And as monitors, what we need to pay attention to is, as you approach a situation, be aware, take some time for some self-reflection. What are your prejudices? What are your experiences that are helping you to interpret the situation that you are monitoring? We all have assumptions about gender, about race, about status, geographical areas, education, whatever kind of populations we are dealing with. We bring some assumptions about populations to our way of thinking. And so we need to pay attention to what those are and how that influences our thinking. Some of the things we're also looking for is if people approach a conversation thinking that their points or their opinions or their voice is more important than other people's voices in the conversation. And are there ways that we listen to others? And do we listen equally to all people who are participating in the conversation? I want to pause there just for a minute, because I think this is a critical piece of monitoring, is to be aware and to pay attention to the bias that you bring to a conversation. Does anybody have any comments? Is there anything in the chat? Do we want to share? How do you resonate with this slide? Okay. So what to watch for when monitoring? We're going to pay attention to stereotyping in the conference. Are traditional or rigid roles being assigned to different people? Are we limiting the potential or the abilities of different groups of people? And an example here is the committee chair tries to influence the election with officers by saying women can be secretaries because they write so well. Dawn, you do a wonderful explanation of mansplaining, manclaiming, and manlighting. So what do you want to say about that here?
Yeah, this is kind of a constant challenge, and I will share with y'all that this is something that happens at your local church. This happens at the district level, at the annual conference level. This happens at jurisdictional and even in the council of bishops meetings. Mansplaining, I'm sure y'all know what that is. My definition would be that if a woman says something and then a man has to come after her to say what she really meant or what she didn't say, or this is what it really means, is as if the woman did not have the authority to fully say what she wanted and explained it. Manclaiming, and this is a term that I have coined, I'll just tell you. Manclaiming is a little bit different concept that you may be familiar with, where you're at a meeting and a woman leader has an idea or makes a statement or something profound, and it just kind of goes by. And about 3 people later, a man has the same idea. No acknowledgement is given to the woman who had the original idea, and suddenly it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. That is like man claiming an idea that maybe wasn't yours originally or originally in that space. Man lighting is something, another term that I've coined, that I have observed a lot lately. And this is kind of developed as women have been promoted into positions of leadership. And a woman may be being celebrated or may be suddenly at the microphone, and a man will interrupt to pull the hot white spotlight onto himself so that there is not a focus on that woman leader. I was a theater major, and we were always taught to look for that hot white spotlight. And there are, and I I don't mean this wrong, it's just a fact. There are men, most especially, who do not realize that they're even doing this. They need a lot, what you were just talking about, Meg, they need to be more in touch with their own self-awareness so they realize how they're treating others. And that goes for us too. We need to support women. We need to step in. If there is a mansplaining, you need to make sure you acknowledge your sister who said it correctly to start with. If there's a man claiming, you can always say, oh, Becky had that idea just a few moments ago. Becky, why don't you share with us a little bit more? Or in man lighting, you have the tools to put the spotlight back on the person that was being celebrated. So that's my nutshell, Meg. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Dawn. So when we get to talking about the other times of bias and sensitivity that we want to pay attention to, are you using language? Is language being used that shows inherent discrimination? For example, are we using generic terms for he, laymen, are terms for guys exclusively male terms? And then language around people who are in a wheelchair, are we placing the disability first, or are we placing the priority of the person first? And then another example that you see is when men are referred to by their surnames and women often are referred to by their first names. I was monitoring a legislative committee at the General Conference a few years ago, and the men in the room were consistently referred to as Reverend, Doctor, Judge, many types of honorifics. And when women delegates were called on, they were called Miss Tracy or Miss this or something. And it was very derogatory. And I don't believe the chair was aware that they were doing it, but when that kind of address happens, automatically the woman is not being given the same amount of respect that a man is. And even in the case of bishop, using the bishop in the surname and the bishop in the first name is not placing the two bishops on an equal playing field. So that's an example of linguistic bias that you want to be paying attention to. And then looking at the balance in the room, are all sides of an issue being presented? Are people being given the chance to ask questions from differing viewpoints? Are all viewpoints regularly paid attention to? Are there certain viewpoints that are regularly ignored? Is the conversation being paced in a way so that everyone has the chance to understand what is happening there? And particularly at annual conferences, you will often have youth delegates or young adult delegates or other delegates who are attending for the first time. And you know as well as I do that there's a lot of maneuvering that happens at an annual conference session. So are the conversations on the floor allowing space for everybody to understand what's going on? And when there are questions of clarification, are they being given the time they need so everyone can feel like they are a part of that conversation and community? And then finally, the use of acronyms. I mean, how many acronyms do we have in the United Methodist Church? Probably about 10,456, right? So our acronyms can often be seen as insider and outsider language. So pay attention to that to make sure everybody can understand what's going on. One of the reasons we do monitoring, and Becky, after this slide, Becky's going to get more into the details of what monitoring is and how to do it. But, Dawn said at the beginning, monitoring is not for finger pointing. It's not for pointing out everything you're doing wrong. It can also help us unlearn behavior that we are knowingly doing or unknowingly doing that excludes others. You pay attention to what you track or count. And when you raise this conversation into our consciousness, it gives us a way to unlearn some things that we have learned across time and to change the way that we interact with others. So Becky? Or before we do it, Paul, I want to just pause. And, are there any questions? Andrea, what do you want to say something a little bit more about your comment?
Hi, about the linguistic bias.
Correct, yes.
Oh, yes. So we were just talking about when male clergy might be introduced, we might hear bishop, doctor, reverend, whatever. And then it's something else when females are being, or female identifying persons are being introduced. Sometimes it is the female that I have found who drop the titles, and in the same breath, after they have introduced or referred to the male counterpart by all the other titles, they automatically drop the titles that you have earned, that I have earned, actually.
Yeah, those customs, they're well ingrained in us, aren't they? And they can, and that's one thing monitoring is paying attention to, and where it can come from anywhere. So thank you for pointing that out for us. Becky?
Okay, thanks, Meg. Hi, everyone. It's great to get to be with you today and be a part of this Lunch and Learn session. I'm going to talk just a little more specifically about the role of monitoring in the United Methodist Church, why we do it, how we report it. And before I jump into this, I'm interested in what word comes to mind immediately when you hear the word monitor or monitoring. What word comes to mind immediately when you hear that word? And if you want to enter that in the chat, you're welcome to.
Or a couple people want to just shout it out.
Or if they want to shout it out, that's exactly right. Okay. So I'm seeing a lot of accountabilities and watching and equity and numbers, and yeah. And those are all wonderful word associations with monitoring. And today I want to invite you to think about holding our conversation in the space of helping us to be our best as the United Methodist Church. I think Don referenced that earlier. And for me, when I am monitoring, that is what I choose to have first and foremost in my mind as I'm sitting in that space, is what can I offer, what can I share that is all about helping us be the best we can be. And of course, if that happens, if we're being the best we can be, then every voice is being heard, every voice is being respected. So, when all is said and done, if you turn to Webster's and just look up the definition of monitoring, you're going to see that according to Webster's dictionary, it is to observe and check the progress or quality of something over a time, keeping it under a systematic review. And I think it's important for members of your annual conference to hear this information. Some may have a very different idea, and that idea may be framed in a very negative perception of what monitoring is, that we are there just to police, we are there for no other reason than just splitting the difference between gender, and that is not at all the reason you are there in that position. So a question I have for you is, when monitoring happens at your annual conference, who typically introduces the role of COSROW, the role of GCOR, who will be
actively monitoring there. And that's a crucial piece. Sometimes it is the commission chairs or chair. Sometimes it is a member of the monitoring committee. As some of you have said in the chat, sometimes it's your bishop, sometimes it's the A to B. And I just want to let you know, and we will go over this in more detail a bit later, but to let you know that we have included in your resources today a script template, if you will, for the introduction of the monitoring role at the annual conference. And hopefully it will be received in the way it's being presented, which is very much a positive light, a light that says we want to help the church be the best that it can be. So the goals of monitoring, and that's the goals of monitoring in a nutshell are about inclusiveness and respect of all voices. They are about self-awareness of all people in the room, and they are about inclusiveness of language, especially in regard to interaction between people in the room and also in reference to God. You know, I can remember early on in my training days, 15 plus years ago, saying that, you know, when we reference God as a man, and we say God is man, then it's really easy for us to just flip that around and say man is God. And so I think when our language is not inclusive in referencing God, then we are doing the church and society, I would say, a disservice. And so monitors pay attention to two primary areas in the process, and that is inclusiveness and implicit bias. And Meg has spoken about each of these a bit, and we're going to look at them just a little more specifically. So, as a monitor, what are you hearing and seeing? Who speaks? Who is called upon? What is the respect that you're hearing and seeing among one another's words? And how will you report these observations to your annual conference? We certainly will want to have your information so that we can collect it and incorporate it into our comprehensive work for the entire denomination. So you'll be observing the persons who are called upon to speak. What are you hearing? What are you seeing? The statistics continue to show that the United Methodist Church membership is at 64% women. And every time I see that, I just find myself stopping and going, and how many women are in leadership positions, and how many women are serving large churches, and how many women are doing the bulk of the on ground grassroots work in the local churches. Certainly the churches that I've been actively involved in over my lifetime as a United Methodist layperson, I can say without a doubt they would have been on the verge of not doing their work very well if the women in the church were not actively involved. So special attention needs to be given to ensure that every voice is heard during all of our sessions. And there are bullies in the room. probably every one of us know this for one reason, and that is we've experienced it. We've either experienced it personally or we have watched and or heard it done. You know, in my work around sexual ethics, the idea of intention comes up often around behavior. And it's not uncommon for me to hear someone say, well, I promise you that person didn't intend for the person to feel demeaned or degraded or bullied or offended sexually in some type of sexualized behavior. And my response to that is always the same. And so I can't help but think about that as I read that last point regarding bullies in the room. Intention is not what the focus is. The focus is how it's being experienced. And as a monitor, I think, again, you're doing the church a favor. You're doing the church good work when you help the church recognize that that is indeed the way people are experience what has been said or what has happened in the room. The next 5 slides will offer some practical how-tos for monitoring. You want to be prepared. You don't want to walk into a setting and be thinking, I'm not real sure what I need to be paying attention to. I'm not real sure what I need to be recording. And though you may not be able, and you aren't able to predict everything that can happen in that room, I think it's always a really good idea to arrive with your foundational pieces securely placed in your monitoring toolbox, so that you have a very strong foundation from which you are reading the room. So arrive early for your session. Check out the room. Some people, some annual conferences set aside a designated space for their COSROW and or GCOR monitors. Some annual conference do not do that, and it'll be up to you to decide where you're going to sit. I find myself always sitting in the same place day after day after day after day. And it has served me well, because when I'm called upon by leadership, people throughout the room see where I am. And my experience has been that members of the annual conference or the jurisdictional conference will come up to me during break and share a concern that they have experienced. Pay attention to the time that is being given. You're going to hear firsthand from our panelists a little bit later about what is involved if you are going to literally keep up with time and how long people are being allowed to speak versus how long other people are being allowed to speak. If you see something that concerns you, write it down, bring it to leadership's attention when you have the chance to do that. And I would say at this point too, I think this might be a good place to just interject this. During breaks and during those times when you have the opportunity to interact with leadership, it's also a wonderful time to recognize what is being done well. Again, based on my experience, this has always been received and almost always is repeated publicly by that person after you have recognized it and brought it to their attention. This slide gives you some excellent information around language and who gets the opportunity to speak, who takes opportunities without being recognized, who hands are in the air or people are in line at a microphone, and who is being called on throughout the time. Are there people in certain parts of the room, in the back of the room or on the far sides of the room, or maybe even in the balcony, if it's in a sanctuary, who are not being recognized, who are not being acknowledged as present in the room. Does there need to be translations provided for people whose first language may not be English, or first language may not be the language of the area where you are? These are crucial pieces, and again, sometimes can be overlooked. Words matter. That's how I would summarize this slide. We know that because we have experienced that. And the only way we can get better at this is through practicing self-awareness. Am I paying attention to what I'm saying? Am I paying attention to my language being inclusive of all? Am I simply referring to men and women, or am I addressing non-binary people in the group or in the space as well? People first language, sometimes referred to in the name of acronyms or as PFL, is a language that really came into the public light probably early 2000s, maybe around 2004, 2005. And it simply is a language that puts people first, and rather than any type of disability they may have. So your language is recognizes the person by what disability they have, rather than who the person is as a result of their disability. And I encourage you to learn more about this. And, Google is a wonderful friend a lot of the time. And literally, if you Google people first language, this is a wealth of information is going to be available to you, including some really good pieces that you can make available, print out, make available, that say, what is out of date, language that is out of date in reference to persons with disabilities, and appropriate language to use now. Again, paying attention to the time that is being allowed for all persons' participation. Is time being called on some people and not being called on others? Are some people allowed to go on and on and on and on and speak, and others being limited? That is just I could talk about that all day long, and I won't, but that is a huge piece. And we've been in those rooms where some persons are allowed to monopolize the microphone and spend a lot of time talking. And so the person who comes up after that person is oftentimes cut short as a result of that. So again, I would say words matter, time matters. How we respect the time that is set aside is really all about our work of respecting one another, which is what monitoring is all about. So Dawn has already taken the opportunity to talk a little bit about mansplaining and man-claiming and man-lighting. I don't know if anything else has come to mind for you since you shared that earlier. If so, here's your chance to build upon it. If not, I will turn the next slide over to you.
Thanks, Beck. I I saw a question in the chat too. I wanted to follow up
Oh, yes, I'm
With-
sorry.
with you on also because you actually said it, Becky, so I want to give credit. But you talked about the question in the chat is not knowing whether interim, I'm going to call them interim reports, had been given along the way, just then that final report. And you noted that there was an informal way of just letting leadership know if you observe something, most definitely that was positive, but also those little hints of something that needed to be changed immediately. And so I want to encourage you to do that. I'll give you, and there was another comment in the chat about you may also be in the best position to see if there's an accessibility issue. Well, that may not strictly be what we're monitoring for, but we're in that position to see it. We're seeking to make the annual conference welcome for all and all voices equal. And that includes noting that accessibility to a microphone, accessibility into the room is there for all. I'll give you just a little example. When we were monitoring the jurisdictional conferences, one of the bishops called for a stand-up vote. And there were two persons who were in wheelchairs. And it took a simple trip to up front, not formally trying to embarrass a bishop at a microphone, but it took a slide trip by me and my partner from who was monitoring for GCOR to say, the bishop just messed up and this needs to be fixed. And by the time we said it, there was this reality check from the bishop. So I do want you to encourage to find a space or a way, if at all possible, especially in those egregious situations, to get an interim report or to the entire annual conference, most especially to the leadership, because we're trying to seek for everybody to be better. That's the ultimate mission. So I did want to kind of amen that in the chat and go along the way and
Yeah, and I would just reiterate what Dawn said, is that we are there as representatives of COSROW, and the reality is we become representatives for all and everything that is happening in that room. And when we are openly received and people, leadership are grateful that we are there, then they are grateful to receive this information. I had a similar situation happen in the jurisdiction I monitored regarding a person in a wheelchair. And I mean, it was immediately when I brought it to their attention during a break time, it never happened again for the next 3 days. And if anything, the exact opposite happened. So just a great opportunity to get to speak with those who are leading the meeting.
okay. So if we go on, this is just a little side point we wanted to make you aware of, because the main thing we are going to be going over with our the forms that we're going to go over after the break and a template for how to draft the report. But also some of you, not everyone, you're going to actually have elections this annual conference. There's a recent decision from the Judicial Council authorizing the election of general conference delegates only. So it's only for your general conference delegates. First, those delegates who have been elected have to have actually withdrawn or surrendered credentials or whatever the language they may have used at that point for those open spots to be identified. Then there is a backfill of your jurisdictional delegates and the reserve delegates. But if they're after all of that, you do not have a complete slate of general conference delegates, you're going to be allowed to have an election at your annual conference. I just wanted to share with you, and some folks are, it's not going to be official until we're almost there. It could even, some of these decisions could come out early at your annual conference session after Boom meets and there's a clergy report that goes to the annual conference. So you're gonna, I mean, this is gonna be hot off the presses for some annual conferences, or potentially. Some annual conferences may have a special called annual conference later to fill those openings if there are openings. So just be aware of that. It is very important to see when the dust settles, what is the makeup of that delegation in terms of men, in terms of women, in terms of youth. What does it look like? That is going to be important for you to have in the back of your mind. This may not, and in fact, it isn't something that a monitor will need to officially speak to. It's something someone else, because a monitor has to be impartial in the work that we are doing, most especially in the election work. If you're monitoring the elections, you need to have someone else, maybe the chair of your COSROW, maybe someone who is a delegate, point out what the current makeup is. At the General Commission, we had pie charts going out to show these are the opportunities for the election for women Episcopal leaders. There would be nothing wrong with your annual conference compiling a pie chart to say, here are the opportunities for the election of women to be delegates to General Conference. But please separate that from the actual monitoring work. It's very important that monitors, the person who has that official title, not endorse a particular candidate or not say something or give a report that gives a perception that you are trying to influence the elections. So just separate it. It's very much COSROW's work to challenge the church, to remind the church where the opportunities for elections, for equality of delegates, where that opportunity is. But the monitoring hat is an impartial hat to be an observer and report what you see. So please understand there has to be a separation of that interject, and you can't interject yourself actually into those elections. So just wanted to make sure that that's on your radar. It's not going to happen across all the annual conferences, but we did not want to have this monitoring training without an opportunity. And I want you to know, if we stand ready to help, if you want to contact GCOSROW directly, because each situation is going to be a little bit different. And if we can help guide you through how to monitor or how to prepare for the election of those delegates, so there will be equity across the delegates that you're electing, we would love to help in any way we can, in a side conversation or helping your AC COSROW chair to develop a pie chart or whatever would be a good way to communicate the opportunities with your delegates. So I just wanted to share that. Are there any questions right now before we pause for a little stand-up hygiene break?
Yeah, Dawn, I saw some questions in the
Okay.
chat, some of them about joining online and monitoring online or hybrid sessions. That was raised by Kristen from Desert Southwest. Lauren raised a question about child care and being able to monitor. And then Sarah also raised a question about specific resources to help conference members who are blind. I put in the chat that those are, specific resources and questions that we can have during our Q&A discussion. Do you think that's okay to kind of hold off on those for now? Or?
Sure, that would be great. I would note that, and I'm going to need to check to see what the exact title is. I do know the section of persons with disabilities has been taken over by GCOR also, and they may have some additional resources. So we can get during the break, we might be able to reach out to GCOR about a link for those resources also.
Well, and Becky just put a link into the chat about person first language related to the National Institutes of Health. So that link is there now.
Okay, so that being said, we're going to give y'all a 5-minute stand-up break. It's 11:02, so we'll start back at 11:07. So thank you everyone for being here.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's see, let me get out of here. Okay. We are going to be shifting gears a little bit. We talked a little bit about the General Commission on the Status and Role of Women. We talked about monitoring. Now we want to look at the different resources that are available for you all who will be monitoring or will be, helping those who are monitoring. If you are subscribed to our newsletter, Wisdom Talks, you should have gotten our monthly issue last Tuesday. In that issue, you should have gotten a link to a Dropbox folder named Resources for AC COSROWs. I'm going to share the link of that in the chat. Just a second. And I want to walk through it with you all so you can kind of see what resources are available and just kind of explain. Thanks, Lauren. Just kind of explain what is all in there, because sometimes it can be a little overwhelming when you're not familiar with the material. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you all have the link in the chat. So if you want, you can follow along with me, or you can reference it later on. So this is what the folder looks like. Sometimes your Dropbox can be set up like this as a grid, or you can toggle it over here to see a list. So right off the bat, we have a few subfolders. We've got the Power of One Voice subfolder, which features a video that hopefully will be shared at your annual conference during your session. We've reached out to all of the 53 annual conferences and requested that they share this video. So you all can get a little sneak peek of that. That is here. We can also share a link to that. But that's one of the subfolders. The other subfolder is a branding toolkit for AC COSROWs. This is a brand new toolkit that we're launching this year. It has guidelines for you all as you share stories and you share resources and you share just leadership ideas and content throughout your communication channels. So we have a branding overview. We have some social media best practices. And then just like an explainer, one sheet for all of the content that is in this subfolder. We have some shareables, which I'm really excited to incorporate into our social media platforms. And I hope that you also incorporate them into your social media platforms, but just, different content pieces for you all to share so that AC COSROWs around the connection are uniform, so that when people, see the work that we do, they're able to say, hey, that's our COSROW group, or that's our COSROW commission, or wow, the Commission on the Status and Role of Women is doing great work and we should support them. So just to raise awareness and visibility on our work. There's another subfolder for monitoring, which I'll go into detail in just a minute. We've got resources for sexual ethics, which have compassionate listening tips, links to the Do No More Harm website, our sexual ethics flyer. You can look at that on your own. We've got resources for women in leadership, such as the God of the Bible link, welcoming a woman pastor, women by the numbers. And then we have this subfolder that has stickers to print from Indiana COSROW. So I don't know if you've seen this circulate around social media, but our friends from Indiana created these awesome stickers and magnet layouts that they're going to be sharing during their annual conference session. And they were kind enough to share them with us. And so now we're sharing them with you all. We hope that, you're able to use them, whether that's on your social media platforms or if you're able to print them on stickers. So shout out to Indiana. We're super proud of you all. And then just additional resources that you can use. For example, a COSROW flyer or another handout of the resources we offer. So all of this is available for you. I'm going to click on the resources for monitoring subfolder, which is what this training is about. And I just want to like go through all of the content pieces that are available here. I shared this in the chat not too long ago, but we have a document that has guidelines and definitions for the monitoring sheet, which we'll go into depth after I share this. So it kind of has definitions for, you know, female, male, non-binary, and the coding that we use for that, race and ethnicity, age, etc. We also have the monitoring sheet for your annual conferences, which is what you will be using. It's available in a Word document and in a PDF format. This is the example of an introduction speech to the annual conference session that Becky talked about. So this is actually the script that Becky used to address the annual conference session. You can just copy and paste it. Just copy and paste it, change the name, and share that script in front of your session. We have this example of a report speech, again, to an annual conference. So after you've done your monitoring, you go up to the podium and you can use this similar template. Of course, you can modify it. You can change some information there. But we just want to give you resources that you can just download and plug in your information and just roll with it. We will have the PowerPoint to this presentation, which is also available. What else do we have? We have these quick sheet monitoring definitions, which are downloadable, printable. If you just want to reference what these different definitions are, you can look at them on this document. Here's a different sample introductory script and a different report script. So that's about it for the resources for monitoring subfolder, which again, you all have a link to that in the chat, and we'll be sure to share that once we share the presentation and the email thanking you all for being a part of this. Yes, yay, Indiana.
So I'm going to actually walk you through a little bit of these forms, and Eileen, I'm going to need your help to probably bounce back and forth a little bit. The two I think I'll focus on are the some of the sample ones. Here are a couple of, and I know some of you are way more. We're trying to come up to speed, and we're trying to always be improving our work. And for that reason, we're going to have a survey at the end of this training, but we also want your feedback. I will share with you that we have found it best to use pencils. Now, some of you may digitize these forms and you may have your computer and you may be working, and that is great. That's a goal we're all headed towards, but we're not there yet in terms of able to provide that, but it may be on the horizon soon. We also, the front page of this report, of this monitoring sheet, you think you'll remember what just happened, but you really need to write it down as it goes. And you may want a little legal pad or something over to the side to put hash marks. Put the session where you are, what exactly you are monitoring, if there is a bishop, to sort of fill this out along the way. I will note that we, and there is a key to go along with this, we do note female or male or non-binary. Now, we can, you have to be very careful in terms of, we do ask that folks introduce themselves as the microphone, but usually it's the name, and for an annual conference, it's going to be the name, their home church, and whether they're clergy or lay. So just be cautious in making any assumptions, but if a person does identify as non-binary. Be sure to honor that designation also. One of the other pieces that's very important, yeah, thank you for highlighting down at the bottom, is that even though not every annual conference has a GCOSROW, some have blended committees, sometimes GCOR is there also. We do consider it part of our work, especially with our work with intersectionality, to make sure that we are for sure also monitoring the ethnicity of the speakers, the ethnicity of the leadership, because that is very important also. Some of those preliminary interim reports that were issued at jurisdiction indicated that the category of persons that had the fewest opportunities to speak at the microphone tended to be women of color. And in certain circumstances, there were worship services at a jurisdiction where no woman of color was present. Friends, I'm going to be the first one to tell you, we talk about positive reinforcement in our reports, but where there is blatant observations that need to be addressed, it is our obligation, our duty to name them and to give suggestions on how those can be rectified. So I do want you to know that. If we could go back up to the top just a minute to page 1. So page 1 is going to give you the opportunities to just, you can do hash marks. You can do hash marks over on a piece of paper and come back and summarize, and you're going to mess up. I mean, it's good to have a partner with you because it's hard to count and pay attention to everything, but we ask you to try to do your best. If folks are identifying that last status, which is clergy or lay, and again, with age, you're going to be kind of making an odd, an educated guess unless you know folks. You can reach out and ask. And also the definitions of what is a younger adult or an older adult, again, are in I think we have those in the key. They may be in the definitional section.
They're in that definition sheet that I'm highlighting now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Meg. So that, again, because I know we still have a Sunday school class at our church that's like the young adult Sunday school class. And I'm just going to say, I'm not sure there's a young adult in that class, but that's another. But these are the current calculations of how those age dynamics are interpreted also. I will tell you something to please highlight this and be on the lookout. The other demographic that was severely underrepresented at the microphone, in worship, in all spaces across our jurisdictions were youth and young adults. In positions of leadership. We have to name that. So just have that on your radar as something very important to name and include as part of your report, so there can be intentionality to correct that. So this is the form basically, and we have continued to modify this form, but presenters would be, we would identify that as like the person who is bringing a piece of legislation. Contributors to the discussion would be those who came to the microphone to speak for or against. You may have a little different analyzation of how you might classify that, but we were trying to kind of categorize, are the presenters all, of one gender, of one ethnicity, are the contributors, are folks on both sides being called? So just, that's what that form is really for. So let's go to the reverse side of that. This is important information too. This is not just a slash section. This is a section for storytelling. This is a section for anecdotes, so that this gives you, and this information is real important in your reports. And we really want this information back. So this is not just data. This is not just counting and numbers. These are examples. This tells the story together with the data of what a fair picture of the monitoring work at your annual conference is. So for example, if you look, the second question, in as far as you could determine, were there any observations of inclusiveness or exclusiveness regarding race, ethnicity? So that's an overall observation, and give an example. Your numbers may show one thing. You may, I've monitored before where someone was called on, he was a white male, and he said, there've been too many white males who have spoken. I'm gonna defer my time and step away. Those anecdotes are part of the story also. So to note, we have something, and feel free to modify this if there is something that is particular to your context, if there is something that tells about what you need to know. That is very important. Okay, let me go really quickly because I know my time is up on this section. And that is to the report. If you could share just the blank template, Meg. Because if you go through these forms, there's actually a form on worship service. There's a worship form on the different plenary events also. But I was looking.
You want the top, this
Yeah.
blank one here on the plenary session?
No, the template for a report. There's actually a template because monitoring, you have to have a report out for our work. It's a different,
Okay.
it's a different attachment.
Yeah, give us a second to
Yeah,
find
no
that one.
problem.
There. Eileen got it.
Thank you. So this is a sample, but there's also a kind of a blank template that's available. This is an introduction of who your report's going. There's a little statement of what your authority to even monitor was, and consider this an official request from the General Commission on Status and Role of Women for all the annual conferences across the United Methodist Church to fulfill their obligation under the Book of Discipline to monitor their proceedings. You heard it here. It's official. If you need anything more than that verbally, let us know. But this states where the authority came from, why there is monitoring going forth. It actually lists who the monitors were, so they're identified and their status, and then a summary of the observations. And this goes from again, this is kind of a summary of that monitoring report. As you go through here, you will see that there's data in here, but there's also anecdotes. And see, here's the data of what was actually seen. And somebody was asking about monitoring a hybrid or an online meeting. The actual first part of this report was from monitoring an online meeting, which is incredibly difficult. I'll just tell you that right now. It is almost impossible. You just have to do the best you can. But here is the suggestions and ideas for improvement. Please do not send in a monitoring report to your bishop or to leadership without positive ideas for how we can correct what you observed that was wrong or could be better or did not contribute to the beloved community. Folks always need a positive statement of what they can do to get us down the road, and that is a part of the wellness of the United Methodist Church. So thank y'all for this session. Again, if we have any, or this section, if we have any questions, we'll be happy to answer them. Are there any in the chat? But thank you, Eileen and Meg, for putting all these resources together. They're available. We're also going to be, the video of this training is going to be available for anyone who is not able to attend. So any questions?
Don, one of the asks that we have is after you have completed your monitoring reports, if you could send them to GCOSROW, and we're going to be also putting together a shared document where we can track some statistics about male and female and non-binary people speaking, as well as clergy and laity. And what we have this vision of creating a pie chart that kind of shows across the United States anyway with the annual conferences. So look for more information about that. That form is not yet ready for prime time, but we will get it to you all very soon.
And Sarah, I saw your question in the chat. Yes, most definitely. It is ideal if there are interim reports. We all want to do better. And it's like, you don't want, one grade at the end of the semester. You want to know if you're doing something wrong along the way, that you have a chance to make it right. So it's that same concept. We want to report what we're observing. So every day of annual conference, we reported, my G Corps colleague and and I reported the first day of Western jurisdiction about how many white men were at the microphone, it immediately turned around the second day. And we noted that in our report, but there were those interim reports also that noted that conduct. So interim reports are very, very important.
And Dawn, let me just add one comment to that for Sarah and everyone. Be prepared to be called upon to come up and give a spontaneous report when you have not been notified that you will be called upon. So we certainly have had that happen over the years as well.
So at this time, we are so pleased to introduce for a panel conversation Julia Pritchett Gonzalez from the Indiana Annual Conference. I have it upon good information that there may be an ordination in the future, like at this next annual conference. She is with Main Street UMC in Kokomo, Indiana, and Kelly Hitchman Craig from the Alabama West Florida Annual Conference. She serves at Auburn United Methodist Church in Auburn, Alabama. These are two dynamic annual conference COSROW monitoring women. And so we just want to invite them, invite your questions and invite them to share with us a little bit about how they got organized. Well, let's start with that. Why don't y'all share about how you got organized, a little history of what type of monitoring you've done in your annual conference and how you got organized and what your plans are for organizing going into this annual conference.
Kelly, you want to go first or shall I?
I can go first. So I think I saw someone in the chat earlier say that they weren't aware of any formal monitoring going on, maybe somewhere in Ohio. Forgive me if I'm messing this up. And I hope you don't feel alone because we experienced the same thing. Yes, Lauren, that was you. Last annual conference was the first year that we had started to do monitoring, at least in any capacity that any of us can remember. And I have to admit that it was actually pretty simple for us because we have the great benefit of Secretary Wiggins Hair being from Alabama West Florida. So we really had a powerhouse of influence working in our favor, which was really, really great. We have started, and I think maybe I'll speak to our first question as well as this, and maybe you can do the same, Julia, and that is some of the tips that we used to get going off the ground and who it was that we were recruiting. We started simply with our COSROW committee, our local annual conference COSROW chapter, maybe if we want to use that language. And that's how we did. And then we asked from each of our members if we had candidates for ministry in churches, or if we had delegates that were going, or college students that they knew of that they planned on going to conference. And from there, we recruited them. We tried to have 2 monitors for every session. And we are still at a point where all of our monitors, at least as far as I'm aware of for last year and this year, have been women. That is, of course, not ideal. Having only women do the monitoring sometimes reinforces the narrative that it's just COSROW up against everybody else. And that, of course, is not true, but that is how it played out for us the first year and for this upcoming year, the second year. And so far, it has been good. We started just amongst ourselves. I'll be honest, as monitoring chair, I probably monitored the majority of the sessions. That's not ideal, but it is not doable. It actually helps you stay focused in a way that I was not expecting. There's no lollygagging or getting distracted on your phone. It did help me to stay in the moment. And so I think that's it. Julia, what about you?
Yeah, so Indiana, I've been trying to think when we started monitoring. It's only been a few years. That actually, came out of a situation where there were some issues that led to an open letter by several women in the clergy. And to address that, COSROW kind of got a boost. We had a new leader appointed, and we hadn't had one for a while. And one of the requests that was made of her is to put together a monitoring team. Now, unfortunately, this started during COVID. So trying to monitor when everything was online gave us some kind of skewed numbers. And also it's really hard to, not everyone turns their camera on. So we couldn't say, oh yeah, this person is this race, or we know that they're this race, or even checking for disabilities. One of the things with Indiana that came up was there were some people who assumed that, oh no, the numbers are more equal than you think, like everything's fine. Yeah, maybe more men are talking, but women talk enough that it balances out. So we had to we took on the challenge of timing how long each speaker would talk. So, when we talk about having 2 monitors, that's part of what we do. We would have someone on timekeeping and someone doing the demographics. We've definitely made mistakes, and I'm honestly, even just right now, learning so much of, hey, this could be really good to incorporate of how do we bring in awareness of disabilities. For recruiting monitors, we've done a lot within the COSROW community, still just trying to build up that, what are we even doing? We've changed the different forms that we've used Google Sheets, made adjustments, because realizing that, the bishop talks a lot, and sometimes that can skew the numbers, as a bishop should. But so it's still kind of a learning process in many ways, and that's okay.
Yeah. Now, can you share with us because there was a question about recruiting teams, and that's a challenge and a work in progress. But what do you do to prepare your team to prepare to monitor at annual conference, to get organized for the work itself?
So Julia and I actually talked about this yesterday, and it's so good that you ask this because we actually approach it differently. We go old school, and I print off all of our forms in mass, and I come prepared with pens and pencils to let people use, as well as clipboards to help people lean on. And there is a set place that I will meet people before sessions and after sessions to collect their forms. We do hard copies because I just found that to be a little more approachable for my people. And that was helpful. It felt kind of like being a kindergarten teacher in the best way. You just have to show up with extra copies and bright, colorful pens and clipboards. And it really did kind of equip my monitors to just have to show up. You don't have to worry about anything. It's one less barrier to help people get involved. And that is what worked for us. But I think how Julia handles it is actually really, really neat. And I hope that other people do it like she does. Oh, and we sit just in the voting bar because since most of us were members of COSROW, we were voting on legislation and things like that.
Yeah. So in Indiana, we've also, if you're a voting member, you sit in the voting bar. This year, we asked, annual conference actually asked us, hey, what do you guys need? Is there anything you want? And it's like, we would like to speak to the conference at the beginning of session and at the end. And if we could have a table and an outlet, that would be great. We got it all, which is always just like, yes. The reason we needed an outlet and table is because we work on shared Google documents. Google Sheets is what we've used in the past. That way, you share the link, somebody brings their personal laptop, and it's just easy to enter that in. You don't have to worry about who's going to collect the data afterwards. It's all right there. This year, I'm really excited because it's my first year chairing monitoring. And as part of that, I reached out to an engineering friend who looked at my sad attempt of creating a Google Sheet and said, I've got this. So now it's even set up so that pie charts will be created even as we enter data. So it's like real time happening. I have no idea what magic she worked to make that happen. I'm seeing in the chat that there's a question about focusing on voting responsibilities and keeping track of monitoring within the same session. And I will say that it is difficult. when you're focusing on what's happening, when you're trying to track everything, it can be very hard to, even have the time to really absorb what people are saying.
So I think, Sarah, that's a great question. Also, I hope everyone knows how great Sarah is. We've worked together because she's in North Alabama and I'm in Alabama, West Florida, and she is also a master record keeper and statistics gatherer. So thank you for all of your work. I sort of my best practice for this, because it does get a little confusing, is that if you have two monitors, and they don't always even have to sit together, if you have two monitors, you can delegate the types of things that you're looking for. So I will typically, person one or whatever, can just be your tally keeper. So that is like, oh, someone's coming to the mic to speak for, this is a white female layperson. And then you just do your little tally marks as they go. And my other person, my second monitor, will be looking out for more of what's going on in the room. If there's access issues, specific things that people have said, if they're problematic and you want to flag them or write them down. So we kind of divided up between, I guess, like qualitative things and quantitative things. And that, at least for us, has made it a little more manageable to be able to participate and monitor. But I think every group has their own best practice. That is just what has worked for us.
Well, let's go to the one of the pieces, and I'm seeing some great comments in the chat too. And there may be those on this presentation that you're in charge of your monitoring team. So please feel free to let us know, to raise your hand or unmute your mic if there's something you would like to add to this conversation. Also, we do consider it a best practices conversation. What about reporting? What experience have you had and how have you reported along the way? And anyway, so share that, Julia or Kelly.
Yeah, go ahead, Julia.
All right. So last year was our first in-person session of annual conference post-COVID. So that was the first time we really had numbers to present. We put together a small video that was really more focused on just what COSROW is doing as a whole. We didn't necessarily talk about what our numbers were. I was able to monitor a jurisdictional conference, and that was the first time I had to give a monitoring report. So I can definitely support the scripts that have been put together. They are super useful if you're not sure what to say or how to handle certain things. Yeah. It can be a little nerve-wracking because even if you preach or teach in front of a crowd, there's still a lot when you are standing in front of your bishop and standing in front of your colleagues, your parishioners, or future parishioners even. There is some pressure in that.
So Julia, that is really great advice about the physical or the presenting of the report. I think I would chime in with the paper report that you prepare. One of the great things about how Julia does it with Google Sheets, which are interactive, is that all her data is auto put together. We still use paper forms and we just scan those into a document. I do not want to risk misreading something or misadding something. So we scan those in. And then as a best practice as a chair, I typically put together some observations, and those are going to include good things as well as things that have come up, whether they are accessibility issues or specific comments that have been made. In my report, I will include names. We had several incidences of specific people saying things that were problematic. Now, when you submit that report to your cabinet or conference office staff, that is fine. If it's going to be published, you need to redact the names. That's just something to think about. While it is kind of scary, I think working with a bishop, maybe I'm biased, but we have just the best bishop here in Alabama, West Florida, Bishop Graves, and the cabinet and the office staff and the bishop himself are all a delight to work with. They have always been open to our report. They received it and even invited our monitoring chair chairs to come in and give a report and do some continuing education, which was really, really great. One of the things that came out of the putting together of our report, Dawn, do you want me to talk about this here?
Sure, yes, this would be
Is-
a great place to talk about it.
So one of the things that came out of our report is we realized that our annual conference is really, really great at including people up front. That is that we have women and persons of color and people with varying levels of disability included in the planning and the presentation and the leading of worship all through conference. I think that is something that Bishop Graves and everyone who's involved with conference planning does really, really well. But because of our work monitoring, one of the things that we discovered is that the conversation on the floor is dominated by white male clergy, as is the number of people who are presenting and bringing legislation, whether it was pre-submitted or happening time of. And out of that, we decided to bring a piece of legislation that we thought will combat this. And that is, we think some education might be helpful for people as a young person and as a woman. Even though I've grown up in the Methodist system, the parliamentary process is still really intimidating and unfamiliar to me. And I think a lot of times the people who get the most speaking time are the people who have had the most practice in it. So we thought some education around Robert's rules and parliamentary procedure might empower our lay people. It might empower our young people and our women, people who are not traditionally super involved in the legislative process, to be more involved. And that's just one of the fruits that comes out of building a report, is that you see trends emerging. And ours are not necessarily that all the male clergy in our conference ganged up against us and tried to silence us. That's not it. It's simply that we think that the people who are not participating because they're not comfortable doing so. And so as you bring these reports together, that's maybe some of the things that you'll start to notice, and you can think through how to make lasting and significant change to help empower people in your corner of the world.
There's a really great question in the chat from Laura Dunlap.
Yay.
Yeah, I don't know if you can see that, Kelly. So the expectation for monitoring annual conference, like what do you monitor? For Indiana, we put most of our focus in the plenary sessions and in worship time, breakout spaces or lunch breaks. I mean, everybody is so spread out over lunch in Indiana that it wouldn't really work. But I think that's a great question. It really depends on your context.
Mm-hmm. We do the same thing. We do it for, we call them business sessions, but plenary sounds much nicer, and worship. And one of the great things about this is that you can also include a copy of your working agenda. At least here in Alabama, West Florida, they're included with the names of presenters. So you can see visually beforehand and afterwards a record of who it is that has spoken from the floor, at least giving reports and things like that.
Thank y'all. And I know there's some other comments in the chat. I did want to reiterate the bookend portions of monitoring. And that is one of the pieces that's been included, is that introduction to monitoring. Whether your monitors give that piece or someone in conference staff, think of it as the same as everybody may be a little bit on better behavior if they know this session is being monitored and what the rules are. The analogy I'll give to you is if we know there's a state trooper on Interstate 65, we're going to be a little more careful about our speed limit than we might be if we're just trying to go visit children or something. So if folks know from the beginning that the session is going to be monitored, who the monitors are, and what the monitoring process is, that is going to lend itself to folks participating in better behavior. But that report that Julia and Kelly have talked about, in whatever form it takes, and going on to a next step, leading the annual conference to be its best self by a resolution that's now coming before is a really positive thing to be leading and be doing. You know, summarizing this, we want you to remember that monitoring is not policing. It's not participating in the discussion. You have to remain neutral. And that's a little iffy. I know we're talking about in a clergy session, your clergy, you may want to speak to a particular resolution. Just make it clear which hat you're wearing and which one you're not wearing if you end up going to a microphone. You may have seen people as presenting a resolution on a stage, but if they wanted to speak, they come down onto the floor. So there is not that power dynamic from where you're even speaking from. So just be aware of those. We're not here to finger point, but when you have to name egregious conduct, as Kelly was saying, name it. But you may want to name it in a protected space where it can be handled, but not embarrassing or not shaming a particular person. That may not do anything to change their behavior. It may just make them worse. But monitoring is observing with intention and working to build the beloved community. And I just want to thank Julia and Kelly. They've got their contact information in the chat. Anything, Julia, that you want to add, or Kelly, you want to add? And I just can't thank y'all enough for the work you've done in your context, for being with us today to help share with anybody. Anything else you want to share before we kind of wrap this up?
I think, oh, go ahead, Julia.
No, you're good, Kelly.
I think one of the things I would add is that I think y'all have done such a beautiful job in preparing a script for us. And if you're coming from a place that is either new to monitoring or unfamiliar with monitoring, or your monitoring has garnered a bad reputation, some of the language that I have found to be helpful in presenting monitoring alongside what's been prepared for us already, there's a racket outside my office, I'm sorry, is that as Christians, we really value the way that we move through the world. We call that our witness. And one of the most compelling parts of our witness is the way we use words and language. And monitoring is not here to get you in trouble, but it is here to make sure that we're all using our witness and our language most effectively. And I have found that to be a way of talking about monitoring that's disarming for people. And so hopefully that can be helpful for you all, that the work of monitoring helps us to keep our witness intact through good use of language.
Thanks, Kelly. That's really beautiful. Thank you. Julia.
I would say that for anyone starting out, good job for starting. Don't worry about getting everything perfect and right the very first time. Do worry about, being impartial, about being aware, but just go for it. You're going to make mistakes. We all know that we've all made mistakes, but it's better to get started than to wait until you're sure you've come up with the perfect plan. Just go for it. Start monitoring and go for it and learn as you go.
Thank you, Julia. And I want to thank all of the participants who are here today. Thank you for your grace towards us if there is language that we've used that's been inappropriate from anyone, on behalf of anyone. So thank you so much for contributing to our seeking to be better as leaders in the United Methodist Church. This is a hard season, friends. We've got disaffiliations, we've got divorces in local churches and divorces of our siblings across the church. So thank you especially for being willing to continue this good work during this really hard season. I'd like to just share a closing prayer here. Steadfast God, as we experience a season of change in our life, a time of hellos and goodbyes, a time of questioning, a time of sacrifice, help us to move through each season assured of your love and strengthened in faith. Amen. Please go forth to do good work and know that we're right there with you.